I don't typically do more than one video on the same game, although I have done that. And as we look here at the overview of my current Talisman setup, you can see why I might want to do another video about it because there's just so much going on. I did a Talisman, a tinkering video. You can see the link to that below a little while ago where I was playing with some house rules and trying to take the very many elements of this game and use them slightly differently to populate a world and then travel through it to try to create an adventure sandbox for characters moving through cities and dungeons. I had the woodlands in that one, I think, which I don't have up here. And since doing that video, I've been continuing to tinker with my house rules and refine them, maybe streamline them a little bit, and thought that it would be worth another shot to talk about the setup that I've got going and maybe demonstrate it a little bit. So I can't even show you everything here. This is my dining room table. It's quite large, and as is the setup here. So what I'm working with, and I'll scroll the elements of the game that I'm using. I'm scrolling up now so you can see the various components. Some of them are only in use for a little bit. So for example, this little pile of cards here from the dungeon, this is just linked to one particular situation that may not even arise, which is the NPC character of the merchant. If he is encountered in combat, you would be able to take from him one of those cards. So a lot of the stuff that I have, I'm trying to use as much as I can, but due to space limitations, for example, I can really only get out this one. This is the city board. So the main elements, and I should say you don't need to watch my other video on this game to make sense of this one, although I do go into a little bit more detail there, perhaps, about the setup. The setup's changed a little bit, but the main elements of what I do to play this game as an adventuring, as a solo, or in this case, it's a co-op. I'm going to be having 4 characters here. Whoops. Running through and ultimately trying to defeat the dragon, so that I am using many elements from the dragon expansion. But the main thing that I do is to take the characters, many of the characters, and usually I choose 12, and populate the world with them. So I have the various characters here in their, that's the Black Knight, for example, in various parts of the world. And when they come into play, when they are encountered, they will be characters that you need to fight, and they will have, now this is where I'm changing it a little bit to streamline the combat from before. So I've indicated what will happen. So the Black Knight is basically going to follow most of the instructions on his card. But for example, the Leprechaun, to differentiate what he'll do, if you lose in combat, he's going to take all your gold and spells. And the Warrior, for example, will take a life. The well, we talked about the merchant here, so you'll get his gold and one of his treasure cards if you defeat him. So the characters, or the world, is populated this way with the characters. And in my original setup, I was doing a character role to sort of have them moving around. I'm still on the fence about whether or not that will happen. But the characters in the city here, so this is the city, and the characters in the city are not yet placed in the city. They are definitely moving around. The city is a dangerous place, and here we have the thief who's going to be there, a tinkerer, a scavenger, a spy, the cat burglar, and of course the tavern maid. And the city itself is going to be guarded by this minotaur. So to even come into the city, you'll have to fight this fellow right here. You will get to the city through this particular tavern area, but you need to be careful when you go there because it is, as mentioned, a dangerous place. So you're going to have all these NPCs wandering around. In addition, you will have the opportunity to, why go to the city? Well, you go to the city to buy things and to get things that are not available in the countryside. And so, for example, you could come here to the armory to pick up a new weapon. You could go to the menagerie to buy a pet, the stables to get a travel companion, a horse. You could go to the sorcerer to buy or sell spells, and the apothecary to buy potions. So this is why one goes to the city. Additionally, we'll be following some of the rules, the wanted posters here, and the option of encountering some of the denizens of the city if you want to take that risk and pulling in the stack of the city cards for travel through the city. Ultimately, the goal is to buff up and get strong enough to make your way through into this central area and ultimately defeat the Crown of Command, the dragon. We will be also using, as mentioned, the dragon rules, and before I started filming, I just took one turn, so you're seeing one dragon scale down there already. To further complicate matters, we have the werewolf traveling around. We have the harbinger rules that we're using, and we also have the Grim Reaper, of course. The point is that in the existing Talisman expansions, there are, especially if you put some of them together, like the Blood Moon and the Reaper, you're already getting the beginning of a creation of an environment, of a dynamic environment where something is going around, and possibly you're encountering that in addition to the encounter cards. Adding to that is basically what I've done, and trying to add to it a little bit thematically by placing characters in the countryside that might be in the countryside, and certainly making characters in the city and creating a sort of dangerous, tight city environment where there's a lot of things going on. Characters wandering around, and it's just overall a more dangerous place and not some place that you're going to go right away in the first turn of the game. Unlike the other video I did where I took the adventure cards and separated them out into followers and events and enemies, etc., here I've reintegrated them, and it's going to be more or less a basic just following the rules and pulling in the card and encountering the card. I'm trying to simplify in some ways what I'm doing because there's a lot of other stuff going on, a lot of other apparatus, since I'm integrating many of the expansions and also activating the NPCs. Along those lines, for combat, for encounters with those NPCs, based on a suggestion, a comment on my Talisman other video, I'm going to limit the combat rounds to 3. And this is where I pre-prepared sort of what the impact and what the effect will be depending on who you are encountering. So there'll be 3 rounds of combat, and basically it's best 2 out of 3. So there could even just be 2 rounds of combat, and then there will be the impact or the effect. The danger, for the most part, on the side of my characters is that they could lose a random card that they have, whatever it might be. In some cases, as mentioned, there's a special effect where, the merchant's going to take all your gold, or I guess it's the leprechaun's going to take all your gold, or whatever. So that is the downside to the combat, but it should go a little faster than what happened in the other game. And I've also chosen some of the simpler characters, or I should say I have avoided choosing some of the more complicated characters that I generally like to play, like the Great Oak or whatever that is, with all the tokens and things, because as it stands, you can see there's a lot to manage here. What I've decided to do in this video, since I don't do playthroughs, is I'm going to just come in and film as I play the game and encounter situations where my house rules are possibly able to be demonstrated, and that is what is the case right here. I had rolled for the NPC movement, as I do at the beginning of the turn. It's a D12 and a D6 roll. The D12 is going to activate the NPC, and the D6 will be the movement. So in this particular case, and again, I didn't start filming, so you'll just have to trust me that that was the roll, but that was the roll. I rolled an 11, which is an activation of the priest. So the way this works is I take the activated NPC and look at the options for movement. Now, the priest had been here at the chapel because the priest hadn't yet moved. So I look and see 1, 2, 3, 4, where they might possibly go, or 1, 2, 3, 4. If the option is to land on one of my characters, which in this case it is, that is the preference. If it's not, then I just take a look at the overall map and just try to keep the NPCs spaced out. If you watch my other Talisman video, you know I had some kind of pre-established situation where somebody would be moving. What I decided to be would be in or out, but it ended up that a lot of the NPCs kind of got jumbled together in one area of the map. So I'm trying to just space it out. It is obviously artificial, but hey, this whole thing is artificial. So, but in any case, the AI rule as it is, the preference is to move to an encounter space with an enemy. And of course, in this case, the enemy is me. So here I am. Now, this was a very failed event because, or I should say, a failed encounter. What happened at the beginning of the Dragon Hunter's turn, and I'll just show you here, I picked up some nicely painted minis with when I got the Dragon expansion a while ago. The Dragon Hunter arrived here at a dragon. And not only was it the Iron Scale Dragon, but the Iron Scale Dragon was sleeping because of one of the effects of the dragon scales. This would seem to be a great situation for our Dragon Hunter because he can roll 2 d6s in combat. And when this happens, he can make a death blow. So he can add them together to determine his attack roll. And this looked great because a sleeping dragon here had only a strength of 4 because they're reduced down by 3. And I got to roll 2 d6s. Well, of course, what happened was, again, I hadn't been filming yet, but what happened was I rolled doubles. Not only did I roll doubles, but I rolled double ones. And when you're making a death blow and roll doubles, I'm automatically defeated, and I lost a life. So that was a real bummer. That just happened. And now what is going to happen is the priest is coming. So the priest arriving here is going to force an encounter, and I'll show you now how I build up. Since this is the first activation of the priest, he hasn't been built up at all into anything. So I will show you how, I think his card is at the bottom here, how that happens. Basically, what I do, and this is well, I think this is probably the same as in my other video. As I said, I have already looked at the cards to determine whether any of it makes sense or not. And as mentioned, I made the note that in winning combat here, you could get a life back from the priest. I tried to kind of make something thematic because many of these attributes here are not necessarily going to do anything different or be thematic in any way. So the priest has his basic attributes here, and it says he begins the game with 1 spell. So this is the beginning of his part of the game. So we will come up and draw him a spell from the deck and see what spell he gets. Burial rites. Well, that's thematic. Cast at the start of your turn. If it is day, it is day. Roll 1 die to pray with the same results as at the chapel. If it is night, roll 1 die to pray with the same results as the graveyard. Okay, let's go back. So we were at the chapel here, and let's see. We can either heal up to your life value for free or pray by rolling 1 dice. Ignored, gain a life, gain a spell. Well, we don't really, we've just started, so we don't really need to do anything, but we might as well roll the d6. Maybe we'll get another spell if we get a 6. So that's really all he's going to do to set himself up right now. Needs to roll 6. He did roll a 6. All right. So the priest is going to get another spell, and this is going to be Solstice Ritual. Cast at any time to flip the time card. Okay, well, I'm not really sure how relevant that's going to be or useful that's going to be, but we need to discard this because we did our burial rites, so that's going to go in the discard. And now we're just going to have a basic encounter. In this sense, the priest, it doesn't really matter here, but the priest is the aggressor because he has come into our space. And this is a question that I have vacillated on in terms of my setup and play as to when in the sequence of play am I going to do the NPC role? Will I, do I do it, and how often? So I've just done different things. In this case, I did the NPC activation after the movement of my character. So this is why the priest came in after I moved. I have also toyed with the idea of doing it before. The reason that I switched is that doing it before gives me, my group, what I felt was too many options to try to avoid these encounters. Whereas if I just move not knowing where somebody else is going to move, then I will end up with the encounter. So the encounter with the priest, as I mentioned, I've switched this to limit it to 3 rounds, best 2 out of 3, and probably not going to show that here. It's just going to be basic combat. So the priest will choose probably his craft. Why not? He's got a craft of 4 as opposed to our craft of 3, and I will do that off camera. This was a pretty quick combat. 2 rounds. The priest got the better of my dragon hunter, who is not starting the game very mightily, despite that extremely large weapon. So the dragon hunter is going to lose what he's got, which is through the rules that I play. First, it's a random card, and in this case, he's only got 1. He's got 1 trophy. He's going to lose it. Otherwise, had he no cards, he would start to lose lives. But in this case, he lost his trophy, and now the option remains for this priest if he wants to encounter this space as per usual. Why would he do that? Well, he could do that to gain what one would gain and become stronger throughout the game, because the NPCs do continue to roam around the game. So it's a sleeping dragon, and as such, it has its strength reduced down to 4, and that gives him, he's got a strength of 2, so I don't think that's going to happen, but that would have been an option per the rules that I'm playing. But he also has the option to just ignore it. It's a sleeping dragon, and in this case, he's just going to let it lie. In lieu of posting any type of Word file on my house rules, I'm going to just summarize them here where I've settled for now. I think taking a big corner expansion, like this is the city, as I mentioned, or you could take any of them, really, dungeon, highlands, woodlands, whatever, and populating it with characters that are thematic to that setting. So I already showed this before, but we'll just review it here. The cat burglar, the spy, there's the tavern maid, of course, and a scavenger, and a tinkerer, and a thief. Populating a corner expansion with a lot of NPCs that get activated as you get there. That is one way to really create a thematic environment. I have the Minotaur there who's guarding the city right here that would need to be dealt with in order to get into the city, which gives you some incentive to wander the countryside first, building up your strength. That's number 1. Number 2, I did have, and you'll see I've removed them here, I did have a bunch of what I'm calling NPCs in the countryside also. I think I had 12 of them to roll for, and I placed them thematically at the beginning of the game. So in the graveyard, I had the ghoul and something else I can't remember, and I tried to do that thematically. I ended up removing that just because the game got to be, it just adds length basically, and it was already getting to be very long, and I wanted to speed up, in essence, the travel through the countryside. And by the countryside here, I mean the outer region. It could go, of course, into the inner region here, but I wasn't, at least initially, dealing with the Crown of Command, even though I was playing with the dragon rules, because the point was that they were trying to get to the city to be able to purchase some of the upgrades, the pets, and the potions, and the what else is offered here? Armory, to then go back and deal with the Crown of Command. So that's number one, really using the sideboard for the NPCs. And for example, in the dungeon, you've got the special treasure cards and whatever, you know, populating it that way. Number two, I think, is to do what I did not here, which is to separate out the adventure decks into events and followers and enemies, and have a selection process for encountering them, or perhaps make it such that you are always encountering, say, either an event or a follower, and there's also objects, of course, and every so often turns encountering an enemy or something like that, to just speed up the game. Because what happens is when you have so many of the expansions and all the cards, the adventure cards mixed together, it can take quite a while to get through what you might need to get through to build up, to progress through the game. So having taking away some of the randomization of this, I think, can speed up the game, but also work more toward creating the story that I was trying to get here. It's, again, it's a light story, it's a light narrative, but the concept of getting through the countryside to get to the city, to then come back and fight this dragon that is terrorizing the countryside. So adulterating the adventure deck is really what I'm getting at, I think, is the second point that, based on my various tinkerings with the game, I would say is something that I would continue to do in the future, which I did not do here. This is just all mixed together. And my final point on this wonderful fantasy adventure board game is to consider really treating it like a sandbox. And like Runebound, for example, that as another game I also love in this area, if you just remove the victory conditions and can enjoy the wealth of material that is available for the game, that has been provided for the game, as simple as it is in many ways, the gameplay and the combat and things of that nature, just, you know, moving around, picking up a card, whatever, if you can just enjoy it for what it is, there really are few sandboxy, wandering around experiences like this that are available, I think, in games that have stood the test of time, and this is certainly one of them, and will certainly, I think, continue to be unique among the fantasy adventure board game genre, because I just don't know that that kind of experience is being created anymore. Granted, this wasn't intentionally created that way, but I think it's very possible, given all that's available for the game, to create that for yourself. And that is my favorite way of playing. So that is another look at Talisman, and bye-bye.